I want to tell you about the night I realized I had been living in someone else's story the whole time. It didn't hit me all at once. It came in slowly, the way water gets into a foundation. You don't notice until the walls start to lean. But before we get there, tell me where you're watching or listening from today. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. It was a Saturday in late April, and I was standing in my closet trying to decide between two sport coats. The charcoal gray one I'd bought for my son Thomas's law school graduation 4 years back, and the navy one with the brass buttons my wife Carol had picked out at Macy's the Christmas before last. She said the navy one made me look like a man who had somewhere important to be. I chose the charcoal. I don't know why. Some decisions you make with your gut before your brain wakes up. My stepson Derek was getting married that afternoon. St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Alexandria, Virginia. 4 o'clock ceremony, dinner reception at the Torpedo Factory Arts Center on the waterfront. I had written a check for the venue. $3,400, non-refundable. I had written a lot of checks over the years. Let me back up. 15 years back, I met my wife Carol at a neighborhood cookout on Elm Street in Reston. She was standing near the drink table in a yellow dress, laughing at something the woman next to her said, and I thought, there is a person who knows how to be in a room. She had 2 boys. Derek was 17 at the time, all elbows and silence and a baseball cap. He never took off indoors or out. Her younger one, Brian, was 13, gap-toothed and loud in the way 13-year-old boys are when they're covering up how scared they are. Their father, a man named Paul Whitfield, had been out of the picture for going on 3 years by then. Not fully gone the way some men go, but gone enough. He'd show up at Christmas, call on birthdays if he remembered the date, send gift cards from Amazon with no personalization. The boys had learned not to expect him, which is a different kind of hurt than being left. It's the kind that makes you stop hoping, and a boy who stops hoping gets very quiet, in ways that don't show up until later. Carol told me on our second date, sitting in a booth at an Applebee's in Herndon because that's where we were, that she wasn't looking for someone to replace their father. She said, I just want someone who will show up. I told her I was a man who showed up. I meant it when I said it. I kept meaning it for 15 years. I moved into their apartment on Carter Run Road in Reston 6 months after Carol and I married. I was 61 at the time. Retired from 32 years with the federal government. Pension coming in steady, savings sitting quiet in accounts I'd built slowly and carefully the way my father taught me. He used to say, a man who doesn't plan is a man who's already failed. I planned. I just didn't plan for this. The apartment was too small for 4 people, and I said so. We bought a house the following spring. Crestview Drive in Fairfax, a colonial with 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and a backyard big enough for a garden I never got around to planting. The house was in my name. My credit, my down payment, $62,000 I'd saved over decades of brown bag lunches and driving a paid-off Buick. Carol's name went on the deed eventually, 2 years into the marriage, after she asked and I said yes because I trusted her and because love makes you believe the asking means something. Derek graduated from community college the summer after we moved in. I was there for that, sitting in the bleachers in a folding chair with a program fanning my face in the July heat. He didn't thank me in any speech. There was no speech. But afterward in the parking lot, he shook my hand and said, "Appreciate everything, Vincent." That was the most he'd ever said to me at one time, and I held on to it. I helped him get his first apartment, co-signed the lease on a 1-bedroom in Arlington. I lent him $4,000 when his car transmission died, and he was 3 weeks into a new job he couldn't afford to lose. He paid me back slowly, over 8 months, $20 here, $50 there, and I never once asked about it. Ryan, I put through 2 years at George Mason before he transferred to VCU, and I drove his things down to Richmond in my truck and helped him carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was out. Carol used to say, "They're lucky to have you." She said it often enough that I started to believe it was something she felt, not just something she said. Derek met his fiancée, a woman named Brianna, at a CrossFit gym in Arlington about 2 years before the wedding. She was nice enough, a little quiet around me, the kind of quiet that isn't shy, but is deciding something. They got engaged on a beach in the Outer Banks in September and called Carol first. Carol called me into the kitchen to hear the news, phone on speaker, and I smiled because that's what you do. The wedding planning started immediately. Carol was deep in it from the first week. Venues, caterers, florists, invitation fonts. I sat at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons while she spread brochures across the surface, and I said yes to things and signed checks when she pointed at where to sign: the Torpedo Factory venue, the caterer out of McLean, the rehearsal dinner at a steakhouse in Old Town that ran $4,200. I paid for all of it because Derek and Brianna were just starting out, and Paul Whitfield certainly wasn't stepping in. Paul had been showing up more by then. Brianna's family was from outside Richmond, church-going people, and I think something about the impending wedding made Paul want to be visible. He'd started calling Derek more regularly, taking him to Nationals games, sending texts I wasn't supposed to know about. Carol mentioned it once in passing and then did mention it again, which is how I knew it mattered more than she was letting on. The Saturday of the wedding, I finished knotting my tie around 2:15 in the afternoon. Carol was at the mirror in our bedroom doing something to her hair with a curling iron, already dressed in the blue gown we'd picked out together at a boutique in Tyson's. She looked beautiful, and I told her so. She smiled at me and said, "You look good, too." And then her phone buzzed on the dresser and she picked it up, and her expression changed in a way I clocked but didn't comment on. We drove to Alexandria in the Lexus, Carol in the passenger seat, directions coming from her phone, conversation light and easy on the surface the way it gets when both people are being careful. Parking was tight near the church. I found a spot on Cameron Street 3 blocks out, and we walked, Carol holding my arm on the uneven brick sidewalk. Inside the church was cool and dim, the kind of dim that feels deliberate, like the building has been practicing quiet for a couple hundred years. There was a program on every pew, cream paper with a burgundy border, Derek Michael Whitfield and Brianna Ann Holloway in script at the top. Whitfield, his father's name. I'd known that was his name for 15 years, and it still took a second to land. Carol touched my arm and said, "They saved the seats up front." She led me toward the third row on the left side, where 2 seats had programs on them and a white ribbon draped across the pew. I stepped in and was about to sit down, when a woman I didn't recognize touched Carol's shoulder and leaned in to say something close to her ear. Carol's expression did the thing again. Then she straightened and turned to me, and something in how she arranged her face told me before she opened her mouth. She said, "Honey, would you mind moving back a few rows? Paul's family came in from Richmond, and they need the front seats for family." She said it quietly, pleasantly, the way you'd ask someone to pass something at the table. She said it like it was nothing, like it was logistics. I looked at her. I said, "Where would you like me to sit?" She said, "Maybe 6 or 7 rows back. There's plenty of space." She was already looking past me at the rows behind, already moving on from the conversation. I picked up my program. I walked back 7 rows and sat on the aisle. From where I sat, I could see the third row perfectly well. Paul Whitfield came in 5 minutes later. He was a trim man, maybe 55, in a dark suit that fit him well. He sat next to Carol, and she leaned toward him and said something, and he nodded. They looked like people who had an understanding. I watched him pull out his phone and take a photo of the altar, the flowers, the light coming through the stained glass, the whole beautiful thing I had paid for. He posted something, I know, because Ryan, who was seated 2 rows ahead of me and didn't know where I was sitting, liked it within the minute. The ceremony was 40 minutes. Derek stood at the altar looking more like a man than I'd ever seen him, and I felt proud of that in a way that didn't have any fine print on it. When Brianna walked down the aisle in her dress, the room made that sound rooms make when something is genuinely moving. I made the sound too. When Derek said his vows, his voice cracked once on the word love, and he pressed his lips together and found it again. I was glad he found it again. I was glad for all of it. I just wished I had been sitting somewhere else while I was glad. After the ceremony, in the receiving line outside on the church steps in the April afternoon, I waited my turn and then I put my hand out to Derek. He shook it and pulled me in and said, "Thanks for everything, Vincent," which was what he always said. I held the flowers Carol had asked me to carry, white roses and greenery, and I handed them to Brianna, and she thanked me and turned to the next person in line. Paul Whitfield was standing to Derek's left, accepting hugs and congratulations with the ease of a man at his own event. At the reception, I was seated at table 9. Carol was at table 1, the family table, with Derek and Brianna and their parents. Paul Whitfield was at table 1. Ryan was at table 1. I was at table 9 with Brianna's college roommates and a great uncle who fell asleep between the salad and the entree. I ate the salmon. I drank 1 glass of Malbec. I sat through the toasts. Paul gave a toast. He stood with a glass of champagne and talked about Derek as a boy, about teaching him to ride a bike, about watching him grow into a man. He said, "I may not have always been there, but I'm here now, and that's what matters." The room applauded. Carol wiped her eye. Nobody asked me to speak. I drove home alone. Carol had texted that she was riding with Ryan to the after party and she'd be home by midnight. I sat in the car in our driveway in Fairfax with the engine off and the garage door open and the neighborhood quiet around me. The motion light clicked on over the garage and lit up the front of the house. All 4 bedrooms and the 2-car garage in the backyard where I'd never gotten around to planning anything. I thought about the check I'd written for that venue. The one for the steakhouse. The $4,000 I'd loaned Derek that had come back to me in small increments with no interest and no particular urgency. I thought about the apartment I'd co-signed, still in my name as a backup on the lease, which meant if Derek ever missed a payment, it would show on my credit. I thought about the 2 years at George Mason for Ryan and the U-Haul I'd rented to drive his things to Richmond. I thought about the 3rd row of that church and the seat with my program on it. I went inside. I did not sleep. By 6 in the morning, I had made up my mind, and by 8, I had started. I called the credit union first. Pentagon Federal, where I'd had accounts since 1989. I had a home equity line of credit open, partially drawn against, that Carol's name was on as a joint account holder. I spoke to a member services representative named Gerald, and I told him I needed to discuss my accounts. Gerald was professional and patient, and asked the right questions. I spent 45 minutes on that call. When I hung up, certain things had changed. Then I called the property management company that held Derek's lease in Arlington. My name was on that lease as co-signer. I notified them that I was requesting to be removed from the agreement at the earliest allowable point under Virginia law. The woman on the phone said she'd need to notify the primary tenant. I said that was fine. I said to go ahead. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened the accordion folder I keep in the home office, the one Carol has always called her folder of paranoia. And I pulled out 15 years of documentation. Every major check, every loan, every tuition payment, every cosign, every wire transfer. I had kept records not because I distrusted anyone, but because my father kept records and his father before him, and men in my family understood that paper is patient in ways that memory is not. The numbers across 15 years came to something in the range of $220,000. That's not counting the house. Carol came home at 12:30, not midnight. She came in quietly like she expected me to be asleep. She found me at the kitchen table with the folder open and a cup of cold coffee at my elbow. She looked at the papers and looked at me and said, "What is this?" I said, 15 years. She said, "Vincent, don't do this. Don't make tonight about money." I said, "I didn't make it about anything." I was at table 9. She started talking. She said Paul being at table 1 was Brianna's family's decision, not hers. She said she hadn't known about the seating until that morning. She said she hadn't wanted to cause a scene at their son's wedding. She used the word there, and I don't think she heard herself do it. I said, "Carol, when you told me to move back 7 rows, was that for logistics or was that because you knew he was coming and you'd already decided?" She didn't answer that. I said, "I need you to understand something. I've been at every table but the one that mattered. I've been in every room of this house for 15 years, and today I was at table 9. I'm not angry. I'm just clear now." She said, "What does that mean?" I told her I'd spoken to the credit union. I told her about the lease. I told her I was speaking to a financial advisor the following week about restructuring assets that were solely in my name. She went very still the way people go, still when something real is happening that they cannot talk their way around. She said, "You can't do this." I said, "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just stopping what I've been doing for you." There's a difference. I moved into the guest room that night. I was not dramatic about it. I took my pillow and my phone charger and I closed the door behind me. The financial advisor I met with the following Thursday was a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, out of a firm in Tyson's Corner I'd worked with before retirement. She was direct and precise and did not editorialize. We went through everything. The house, titled in both names, was going to be the complicated part. Virginia is an equitable distribution state, which means it's not automatic, it's argued. But the home equity line, my pension, my federal retirement accounts, my personal savings predating the marriage, those were categorized differently. Patricia helped me understand what was mine and what was mine to protect. She looked at my accordion folder with something that was almost respect. She said, "You kept good records." I said, "My father taught me." The divorce was filed in Fairfax County Circuit Court on a Tuesday in early June. Carol had hired a lawyer by then, a man named Hendricks, who wore his suits a size too small and talked fast. I had Patricia and a family law attorney she recommended named Gregory Park, who was quiet and methodical and never used two words where one would do. Derek called me 2 days after Carol told him. His voice had that tightened quality, the one that means he's working hard not to say the first thing that came to mind. He said, "Vincent, I don't understand what's happening." I said, "Yes, you do." He said, "This isn't fair to Mom." I said, "Derek, I was at table 9 at your wedding. Your father was at table 1. I paid for the table." Quiet on the line. I said, "I'm not angry at you. I want to be clear about that. You didn't seat me where I sat, but nobody said anything either. And somewhere in those 7 rows was 15 years of me being where it was convenient for me to be and not where it was true." He didn't respond for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know where you were sitting. I thought you were closer." I said, "I know you didn't look. That one sat between us for a while." He said, "I should have looked." I said, "Yes, but you can't go back and look now. Neither can I." The mediation was held at an office building off Route 7 in Falls Church, one of those buildings that exists to be as neutral as possible, beige walls and gray carpet and nothing on the walls that could give anyone an opinion. Carol came with Hendricks. I came with Gregory Park. Ryan was there in the hallway when I arrived, sitting in a chair scrolling his phone, and he stood up when he saw me and for a second looked like he was 13 again and frightened. He said, "Hey, Vincent." I said, "Hey, Ryan." He said, "I'm sorry about how everything went." I said, "I'm sorry about how everything went." I said, "I know you are. I believe that." He said, "The seating thing, I didn't know that was happening." I said, "Ryan, I know. That's not your weight to carry." He nodded. He sat back down. He looked like a man who was learning something he hadn't wanted to learn. Inside the mediation room, Hendricks led with the house. Marital home. Substantial time invested. Significant disruption to Carol's life. He had prepared language about contributions to the household that was technically accurate but had a way of making Carol sound like she'd been running a difficult operation that I had merely funded. Gregory Park let him finish. Then he opened a folder that was considerably thicker than Hendricks's and placed it on the table. He said, "Mr. Beaumont purchased the home at Crestview Drive with $62,000 from premarital savings. He has maintained the mortgage, property taxes, and all major repairs. His name has been on the deed since purchase. Mrs. Beaumont's name was added as a courtesy, not as a financial contribution. We have full documentation of every payment made toward the property and toward both of her sons' significant financial needs over the past 15 years. He slid copies across the table. The mediator, a woman named Judge Calloway who had retired from the Fairfax bench 2 years prior and had a way of looking at you like she'd already heard everything, read without hurrying. Carol leaned forward and said, "This isn't about money. It's about our family." I looked at her. I said, "Carol, I was at table 9. She looked away. Judge Calloway put the papers down. She looked at Hendricks over her reading glasses and said, "Counselor, the premarital asset documentation here is substantial. The equitable distribution argument is not going to be straightforward." Hendricks adjusted his too small jacket. "It took 4 months to settle. I kept the house. Carol took a retirement account, her car, and a settlement that was fair without being generous. She moved into a condo in Reston not far from where she and the boys had lived before I came along. Derek helped her move. Ryan helped too. I know because Carol mentioned it in the text she sent me that was mostly civil and ended with a sentence that said, 'I hope you find whatever you're looking for.' I didn't respond to that part. I stayed in the house on Crestview Drive for a few months after the settlement, long enough to finish some things I'd started, and then I put it on the market myself. A couple from Woodbridge bought it, a teacher and a logistics manager with 2 little girls and a dog that had already scratched the new floors on the walkthrough. They were excited in the way young families are when they're at the beginning of something. I signed the papers and felt something I hadn't expected, which was not loss exactly, but the kind of release that comes when you put down something you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. I bought a small place in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, just across the Potomac from the Maryland line. An old craftsman bungalow on a street where the houses know each other. A front porch wide enough for 2 chairs, A kitchen with a window that looks out on the backyard. A fireplace in the living room I learned to use properly by the end of November. There's a hardware store on German Street run by a man named Earl Clemens, who is 74 years old and has been fixing things in that town since before I was paying attention to anything. I go in on Saturday mornings and we talk. He lost his wife 11 years ago and rebuilt his living room floor by himself the following summer. Not because it needed it, he told me, but because his hands needed something to do that had a clear result. I understood that. I started a garden in the spring, nothing ambitious. Tomatoes, peppers, a row of green beans along the fence. I got more of it wrong than right the first year and learned what I needed to learn for the second. Ryan called me in October. This was about 8 months after everything settled. He called on a Sunday evening, which is when he calls people he's thought about calling for a while. He said he wanted to talk, not about the money or the house or any of it, just to talk. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. He told me about a job offer he was weighing. I told him what I thought. He said he'd always trusted what I thought even when he didn't say so, and I told him that was enough. I said, Ryan, you don't owe me anything. He said, I know. That's not why I'm calling. Derek took longer, almost a year. He sent me an email in February, formal at first, the way Derek gets when he's nervous, and then it loosened as it went. He said he'd been thinking about the wedding, about where I was sitting. He said Brianna had asked him a few weeks after the fact whether that had been right, whether he'd been okay with it, and he said he hadn't had an answer for her. He said not having an answer was its own kind of answer. He said, I didn't do right by you that day, Vincent. I don't know if sorry covers it, but I'm saying it anyway. I read it twice, then I wrote back. I said, Derek, you were a 17-year-old boy in a baseball cap who didn't know what to do with me. I didn't know what to do with me either. We figured out most of it. That's not nothing. I said, apologies don't undo things, but they're the beginning of something if both people are willing. I'm willing. He wrote back one line. He said, thank you for not giving up on me before I figured it out. We had lunch in March at a place in Old Town Alexandria, not far from the church. We sat outside in the early spring cold because neither of us mentioned going inside and neither of us wanted to be the one to suggest it. We ordered sandwiches and ate them and talked about ordinary things, work, the garden I was starting, a documentary he'd watched about baseball that he thought I'd like. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a scene from a movie. It was two people having lunch who used to know each other and were deciding whether to know each other again. I think we are deciding yes. Slowly. But yes. These days I sit on the front porch most mornings with my coffee and watch the street come awake. The neighbor across the way, a retired postal worker named Gene, waves when he gets his paper. Earl's hardware store opens at 8, and you can hear the sign creak when he unlocks it if the wind is right. I turned 67 last month. I didn't have a party. I bought myself a good bottle of bourbon and sat on the porch and watched the evening come in over the ridge, and thought about my father, who died at 79, still planning, still keeping his files in order, still saying a man who doesn't plan has already failed. I thought about what I would add to that if I were saying it to someone younger. I'd say this: you can plan everything and still walk into a life that wasn't meant for you. And when the moment comes that makes it clear, the moment you can't argue with or explain away or decide you misread, you'll have a choice. You can keep being useful to people who have decided you are useful. Or you can walk out into whatever is left of your life and find out what it feels like to take up the right amount of space. I chose the porch. I chose the garden. I chose the window in the kitchen where the morning light comes in straight and clean and belongs to nobody but me. If you've ever written the check and sat in the back, if you've ever been the one keeping everything together while someone else got the toast, I hope something in this story lands for you. Not as permission to burn anything down, but as a reminder that your name on a deed is worth something. Your name on a life is worth something. And when they tell you to move back, you don't have to. Thank you for listening. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every voice matters to me. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Vincent, and if this story spoke to you, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it today. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, out here on this porch in Shepherdstown with the coffee going cold and the morning coming in quiet over the ridge. I've turned it over more times than I can count. And I don't think it was one bad day that broke things. I think it was 15 years of small surrenders, each one too small to name, until the day they added up to table 9. That's how it works, in my experience. It's never the one moment people point to. It's everything that made that moment possible. Carol didn't decide to seat me in the back of that church on a Saturday morning. She'd been deciding it for years in the way she angled her phone away from me, in the way she said their son without hearing herself, in the way my name appeared on every check and almost nowhere else. The wedding was just the day the arithmetic became visible. And I'm not without blame in that. I kept the books, but I never showed them to anyone. I kept showing up, kept signing, kept saying yes when something in me knew better, because I told myself that's what a man of integrity does. He doesn't keep score, he doesn't make people feel the weight of what he gives. But there's a version of that thinking that becomes its own trap. When you make yourself invisible enough, people start to believe you aren't there. That's not generosity. That's erasure by installment. Derek said something at that lunch in Old Town that I've been turning over ever since. He said he didn't know where I was sitting at the ceremony because he hadn't looked. And the reason he hadn't looked, I think, is because no one had ever taught him to look. Not for me, anyway. Carol hadn't modeled it. Paul Whitfield certainly hadn't, and I had been so committed to being undemanding that I had accidentally taught them I didn't require attention. You don't notice the foundation of a house until it shifts. I had been very good at not shifting. That's the thing about integrity without visibility. It holds everything up and gets no credit for it, and eventually the people living in the house start to believe the house holds itself up. They're not wrong because they're cruel. They're wrong because nobody told them otherwise. What I know now at 67, sitting here with my cold coffee and my small garden and a neighbor who waves from across the street, is this. Character is not only what you give, it's also what you refuse to keep giving when the giving has become one-sided and invisible. Staying when you should leave is not loyalty. It is the slow loss of your own outline. And a man without his own outline is useful to everyone and known by no one, including himself. Ryan is building something real. Derek is learning to look. Those things matter to me, not because I need the credit, but because it means something went in, even when I thought nothing was landing. That's how it actually works. Quietly, slowly, and not on the schedule you expected. I planted tomatoes wrong my first year out here. Watered too much, planted too close, got about a third of what I should have. This spring I did it right. Not because I'm smarter, because I paid attention to what the first year showed me. That's all any of us can do.